Hi everyone, so today I'm going to do a review on this brand of resin called Art Resin, and this company actually contacted me to see if I wanted to try their resin and do a review. So I agreed to it, and they sent me this sample kit of 4 ounce each of the hardener and the resin. So they claim that their resin is specially formulated to have excellent yellowing protection, as you can see right here. And that's because not only they have the standard UV stabilizers, but they also have another type of stabilizer called HALS, which stands for Hindered Amine Light Stabilizer. And what's special about this type of stabilizer is that it does not absorb UV radiation, but act to inhibit degradation of the polymer, aka plastics. They slow down the photochemically initiated degradation reactions, so photochemically meaning via sunlight. And also, this HALS is capable of providing extreme long-term light stability and thermal. Now the keyword here is thermal, because a lot of people don't know that resin pieces, or epoxy resin in general, can yellow with heat. So if you live in a hot climate or during the summer season and you see your resin pieces turning yellow, even though you put them away in the closet, that's why. The heat can also degrade your resin pieces. So that's something to keep in mind when you do store your resin pieces, to keep away from heat and sunlight. So another thing about this resin states that it does not have VOCs, and VOCs stands for volatile organic compounds, which are organic chemicals that have high vapor pressure at ordinary room temperature, aka vapors or fumes. So a lot of epoxy resins out there do have fumes. Vapors are not really good for your lungs with constant exposure. That's why I always tell people to wear masks or work in a well ventilated area. But Art Resin states that you don't have to wear a mask because their resin is specially formulated to not have VOCs. So that's pretty cool. Now, as you noticed, as you can see from right here, both liquids, part A and B, resin and hardener, are completely crystal clear. A lot of times the hardener for epoxy resins, almost always the hardener has a yellowish tint to it. So I'm already liking the look of the hardener because there's no yellowish tint to it. So I'm gonna do an honest, hopefully thorough review on this resin, and I hope you guys find this helpful. So let's get started. Okay, so I measured part A and part B in a separate measuring cup, and I'm just gonna dump this in here and then mix them together. So my room is pretty warm. I live in Southern California, so it's probably like 80 degrees in here, and I have no AC, so the viscosity is not too thick, not too thin either. But again, I don't know if that's because my room is really warm, but I don't mind the viscosity or the consistency of the liquids. And I'm not getting a whole lot of bubbles in here either, which is good. So it's definitely thinner, maybe a little bit thinner than Vitatex Light, because I find in Vitatex Light really viscous and creates a lot of air bubbles, but this one's so far so good. So I'm just gonna mix this until there are like no swirls and it is thoroughly mixed. Okay, so naturally I put my nose right into the resin to see if there has any smell, and it does have some kind of smell. Obviously, since I put it up to my nose, but when I'm far away from it, I don't smell anything. And the smell that I'm talking about kind of has a, not a bad smell, but definitely smells like chemicals, but you know, it's not bad. Like I said, you can't smell it unless you put your nose right above it. Okay, so the directions say to leave the resin for 5 minutes for it to degas, for the bubbles to rise to the top. So I'm gonna do that. I don't know if you guys can see very well, but here are all the bubbles in the resin after my initial mix. So I'm gonna leave this for 5 minutes to see if all the bubbles will rise to the top. Okay, so I don't know if you guys can tell, but most of the big bubbles did rise to the top, but there are still some micro air bubbles, but you know, that's just normal. So I'm just gonna take my lighter and get rid of the bigger bubbles, because that's what they recommend you to do. And then I'm gonna start pouring. So I have 3 of the same molds here, and I'm gonna do one completely clear with nothing in it, one pigmented, and then one I will do like a sticker and glitter. So I'm just gonna pour. Oh, and also I'm gonna dome this mirror. So I'm gonna go ahead and pour a thin layer in each mold. Okay, the resin does feel warm because, like I said, my room is really hot. And look, I'm sweating my gloves under my gloves. But I'm gonna do that, and then this one I'm going to dome. So let's see. A little bit of time. I'm using a mirror because so you can actually see the reflect. I mean, you can see like the bubbles and things like that. I'm just gonna push the resin all the way to the edges. And then I'm going to take a lighter later and then sweep it across the surface once more bubbles rise to the top. But this one I'm going to keep it clear. This one I'm going to put sticker in. And this one I said I was going to use colored resin, but I don't know what I'm doing. Why did I pour a clear layer? Let's pour another into another mold. I'm going to color some of this resin. Actually, I'm going to color the whole thing. So I'm gonna put a couple drops of the pigment here that I have in my shop, and then mix it. I think I'll pour it into this mold with all the details. And then check back on it and check for bubbles and pop them as needed. Okay, so I poured into another mold, the one that I colored pink, and I'm just gonna keep these two, you know, as like blank clear pieces of resin because I want to do another test later on. And then this one's with a sticker, and I'm gonna put a glitter in the background. And then this one's the domed mirror, which I've covered with a cup to prevent any dust from falling onto the piece. So let's wait for I think 24 hours and we'll check back. Okay, so it's been 24 hours and I'm going to unmold all the ones that are in the mold and see how they cured. Okay, so here are all the pieces that I popped out, and let's first take a look at the domed mirror here. Okay, so here's the domed mirror, and as you can see that it domed nicely, and it's very, very shiny, and absolutely no bubbles and completely clear. Don't mind the specks on the mirror, it's actually dirty. I didn't clean the mirror before I domed it, so that's why there's some specks on them. But other than that, no bubbles whatsoever. Very, very soft. I mean, very smooth and shiny. However, I did notice that even after 24 hours, this resin is not completely hard. So if I push my nail into it, as you can see, it leaves the nail mark, but after a few seconds, it kind of goes away. See? So I don't know if it's not fully cured or whatnot, but it still has like a gummy texture to it. It's not sticky, it's kind of soft. So all the pieces kind of turn out that way. So like for this one, it's a pretty thin piece, but look how bendy that is. It's pretty bendy. So they all have like a kind of like a gummy texture to it, not completely hard. But anyway, let's check out the clear ones. And look how clear these are. Wow. I mean, absolutely no micro air bubbles or anything like that. Seriously, no micro air bubbles, you guys. This is quite amazing. So that's really cool. And then this one's a cameo setting, and again, absolutely no micro air bubbles or anything like that. And this one's the sticker and glitter. Turn out cute and bendy. Okay, and then this one's the thicker cabochon. I purposely did a thicker piece just to see what it will look like. And you can't see it through the camera, but this one does have some micro air bubbles. Very minimal though, very, very minimal compared to other brands. But it's crystal clear. And for all epoxy resins out there, it's better to work in thinner layers, because thinner layers, easier for the air bubbles to rise up to the, top to degas on their own, or for you to pop. So that's why thinner pieces like these have no micro air bubbles, because as enough was able to degas by itself. But for thicker pieces like this one, it's very difficult for the bubbles to rise to the top. So just keep that in mind. If you want completely bubble free or just limited amount of bubbles and micro air bubbles, you want to work in thinner layers. So I went to the website and make sure that I got the curing time correct, and it says 24 hours, but 72 hours for a full hard cure. So I'm gonna wait 72 hours and check back to see if these pieces harden a little bit more. So I'll be back. Alright, so after 72 hours, here are the resin pieces, and they're definitely harder or more firmer, but they are still flexible. So as you can see with this very thin piece, I can bend it, and the more heat you apply, the more bendy it gets. So even with your body heat, it gets quite flexible. And when I push my nail into the surface, still leaves a nail mark, but it self-heals. It goes away in like a few seconds. So yeah, so this resin, and I confirmed this with the seller that this resin will cure with some flexibility to it. And you guys might think, oh, maybe I just didn't mix enough parts. And I did another batch with 1 ounce each, and it's still the same. Here's an example. This is with 1 ounce of hardener and 1 ounce of resin, and you can see that it's flexible and it still leaves indentation on the surface. So doesn't matter how much you mix, it's gonna turn out flexible once it's cured. So with that being said, that can be a good or a bad thing depending on the application or depending on what you're using it for. Obviously, if you want to make thinner pieces and you don't want it to break, you want your pieces to be flexible, because if you use a very hard resin and it's this thin, and when you try to bend it, it's going to snap in half. So harder the resin, the more brittle. So that's something you got to keep in mind when you do purchase resin for your for your project. This will be good for coating your artwork on canvases, because when you do transport your artwork, you know, things happen. Some may drop it, or it might get knocked over, things like that. So with this flexibility, it won't crack, it won't scratch either. So this resin is scratch resistant as well. Alright, so now I'm going to be doing an experiment on these two clear pieces to see how stable it is when it comes to UV rays, heat, or sunlight. So just keep watching, and I'm also going to be listing the final overview of this brand of resin. So just keep watching.